This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I am your host, Steve Anderson, and today our guest is Ken Rowe, MD, who is a double board-certified internal medicine and emergency medicine physician who has treated more than 170,000 patients across a 35-year ER career. His book, Prime reframes midlife as a powerful awakening rather than decline. He created the Reclaim, that's capital RECLAIM method, to restore men's vitality, identity, and purpose through precision medicine, neuroscience, narrative psychology, and emotional reintegration. He is a medical expert in filmmaker Charles Mattocks' upcoming international docuseries about sleep and health, bringing attention to the invisible epidemic of sleep disorders destroying men's vitality. Dr. Rowe speaks to corporations, executive teams, and healthcare organizations about the silent burnout dismantling men's performance in midlife and teaches organizations how to rebuild resilience using precision health tools and his Reclaim framework. So, Dr. Rowe, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you on today.
Hey, thank you very much, Steve. Pleasure to be on.
So give us a little context. I know, in your book, I read about kind of your upbringing, but for those listening, let's just tell them a little bit about, your early childhood and how that influenced what you're doing today and kind of how you became a physician.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Central Texas. We were pretty much the only Asian family in the community, which by itself it wasn't bad at all. I mean, it was college town, college station. Um, I had a really good time growing up until about fifth grade. My differences were celebrated. I mean, it was like, everybody else thought of me as some kind of cool, different guy, and it was really nice to be in a community and environment like that in the 60s and 70s. Things changed when I moved, though. We moved to a different school district. It was a larger city. It was the next town over, Bryan, and much more diverse, bigger. I was still the only Asian, but then uh, it just so happened that my difference wasn't a superpower anymore. It was a liability because I was getting severely bullied, and I was only one of the of an ethnic group, so I got picked on pretty easily. I mean, I was the smallest. I was also the youngest. Um, I was fortunately also top of my class, so I suppose looking back on it, it made me a target. But I had a lot of instances where, there was physical, mental, emotional. I do talk about how in my book I got thrown into a dumpster
Yeah.
and locked in at a bus stop, and there were several other instances where people, my classmates and schoolmates, pretty much reminded me that I wasn't one of them.
Yeah.
It created it created a situation where, I went from the penthouse to the outhouse like
Yeah.
in a month, and that was a tough transition. But looking back on it, everyone says, would you change something? Is there some truth to say if you change something? And if I played it all out, I wouldn't have gained the wisdom that I have over the years and being an ER doctor.
Yeah. Well, that's a good way to look at it, but it is just so disappointing when, we just see that, why can't people just be kind? Why do we have to, bully people or call out people because they're different or whatever? It's just so discouraging, but yet we all know it happens, and you certainly lived it. For those watching on video, I'm holding up your book here called Prime. which you describe a lot of what you just said and a lot of what happened when you were a kid in the book and how that influenced you. And Prime, the subtitle is How to Win the Second Half of Life. So I understand you do a lot of keynote speaking and talk to organizations as well now. So tell us a little bit about that. And are you continuing to practice medicine, or have you retired from the day-to-day medicine world?
No, I'm continuing to do the occasional ER shift, and part of my practice is a telemedicine practice where I work directly one-on-one with men doing that midlife transition and kind of opening up people's or men's eyes, also their family members and everybody around them. So I do work with individual men age 40s through 70s on my telemedicine platform. But I also wanted to Steve, make this kind of a mission. I'm an ER doctor, 35 years of experience, and you know, I see I see this pattern repeating itself time and time again. That is, it's the 55-year-old man who comes in with a heart attack, and he hadn't seen a doctor in 10, 15 years, right? I mean, that just, and I would like to say I'm seeing less of that, but as my career progressed, I was seeing more of it, to be quite honest with you. People are busier. People are working two jobs. They're taking care of, sandwich generation, right? They're taking care of their kids and their parents. And supposedly they're taking care of themselves. They're taking care of their businesses. But their health takes a distant third, fourth, or fifth place in that sort of stacking. So what I ended up seeing, and the pattern that I saw was not heart attacks or strokes or endpoints. The pattern that I saw was regret.
Mm,
And that really stuck me in my heart. And um, it would always make my heart sink down to the floor because, I would see a man coming in and his whole life is changing. Life might be ending um, because of things that piled up over the past 10, 20 years. And what I found is that with regret, it's not necessarily that we regret the things that we did. We regret the things that we didn't do.
yeah,
And inaction is an action. So, and another thing that I like to emphasize is neglect leads to regret.
yeah,
So all those things that you're neglecting, that you're trying to put off for later. Let's talk about sleep. Let's talk about your health. Let's talk about that weight gain. Let's talk about just getting active or getting outside. That just all piles up like compounded interest until the debt comes, which is in a form of um, some tragic event, a health scare. And so I wanted to make a transition from my career because I'll be honest, Steve, working ER shifts, it's very stressful.
oh
12-hour
yeah,
shifts, I mean, it's just, I mean, you try to string a couple of those along. If you're working night shifts along with that, it takes its toll. So it's not exactly the healthiest choice you can make. And I came to grips and I said, in the ER, I'm really good at saying, okay, what do we need to do now to help the sickest patient and just continually um, sorting that out in my mind for a 12-hour shift. Um, but I also raised the same question in my own life. I said, is this choice making me stronger or is this making me weaker?
yeah,
And just pounding all those shifts definitely was making me weaker in a lot of ways. So, but I wanted to change my mission and just say, hey, there are a lot of guys out there who need this information. They need the guidance. There is AI technology that's very helpful as far as diagnostics now, and also therapeutics that are just abundant. So these guys need some information. They need some help. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and when you're in midlife, one of my keynotes is that um, midlife is medicine's biggest blind spot,
yeah.
and
The book is so compelling because not only are you looking at patients and you see people coming through the ER and through your practice and whatever that they have these issues, but you're very vulnerable in the book, and you talk a lot about your own issues, and that you did a lot of you know, pushing down the feelings and not letting things come up and not getting enough sleep and not opening up to those that you love and so on. And so it was very vulnerable in the book, but I think that gives you a lot of credibility that not only have you seen it in others, but you've experienced it yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for mentioning that because that was, a big reason why I wrote the book, was that I think we all have stories and our stories are very powerful. And when we share them in an authentic, vulnerable way, particularly as a man, I think that gives other men permission to tap into their own stories and their own vulnerabilities and become more authentic. So I go in great detail talking about how, this is the ER doctor, right? You're going to look at me one way, but I'm also a human being, and uh,
Yeah.
I'm a deep thinker, and I really wanted to have the audience and the people who read my book connect with me, and I wanted to connect with them.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so interesting to me that we as humans, I think, do judge and look at others and kind of have narratives based on usually misinformation or not enough information. When you look at somebody like you're this great, your parents have this great immigrant story. You're a great achiever. You've accomplished this. You're an ER doc. You're at the top of the stack. Everything's great, but yet internally, you've got some struggles, and so to share those, I think, helps us all realize that, what looks on the surface as being, man, you're living the dream. There's still some issues that we all have to address and deal with, or they catch up to us.
That's absolutely correct, Steve. I mean, we all have struggles. We've all had trauma. I mean, we all have triggers. We all have things that it's what life is all about, right?
Yeah.
But I think particularly as men, if we try to package all these experiences into something else, you can label it whatever you want, denial, justification, I don't want to talk about it. It's kind of a male, man kind of defense mechanism. If we go into that, that's just ultimately that's going to be to our own destruction, and it's going to be very destructive to our families and the ones who love us.
I think a lot of us know what the physician oath is, and one piece of it is first do no harm. But you've also created this the Nova oath. So tell us what the Nova oath is, and what are you trying to say in comparison to the physician oath?
It's kind of funny, Steve. I was when I took the Hippocratic Oath. It's mostly ceremonial, right? But it's a credo that we physicians do want to live by, um, and do no harm. On some level, I always felt like that was incomplete. I mean, I do like do no harm. I mean, you're not going to intentionally harm someone based on your knowledge. I mean, that's against what being a physician is all about. But there has to be something else that starts appealing to really helping and healing somebody. Because there's a story there, there's a soul, there's more than just science and medicine. So my credo on creating the Nova Oath is, and by the way, I just thought the Hippocratic Oath needed an update, right? I mean, yeah, just little. I mean, there's timeless wisdom is one thing, but also incorporating that into a modern world, I think is very important. So I wrote the Nova Oath. I'd been thinking about it for 40 years. And, essentially the credo is not just do no harm, but do more good. You
Mhm.
know, that takes you more into an active role where you're looking to do good. You're not looking, because do no harm to me, that kind of brings into play defensive medicine and, cover your A medicine. And, it's like you have to be more bold and more compassionate into taking some action into helping somebody. And that is, trying to prevent a heart attack or stroke, trying
Yeah.
to talk to somebody in their 40s and 50s and understanding that it's not all about their numbers, it's about their trajectory, and trying to really bring that into kind of a general message about how medicine should be practiced. So that's kind of the essential part of my Nova Oath. I mean, it's 9 parts. It's where we're talking about one of them is don't treat symptoms, but treat stories. And I think
Yeah.
that's very important. Everybody has a story, and we should really get to understand people on that level.
So if you can get men in their 40s and 50s to come to the physician, which is the first big hurdle, but let's say you can get them there, what should they be asking their MDs? What questions should they ask?
I think the biggest question they should ask is play your future self. Hey, doc, where do you see me in 5 years if I keep doing the things that I'm doing up until today? And, nobody really asks that question of a doctor. Doctors, mostly, we're busy, right? I mean, the primary care docs, they've got 15 minutes appointments, maybe less, maybe even more computer work to do. So they're looking at your snapshot of tests here and now, and they'll say, you're fine. Keep taking your statin. I'll see you in a year. But I think if you pose that question, how do you see me in 5 years? If I continue on this same path, then I think that raises the level of the discussion. Now the doctor has to kind of think about things a little more. And what he or she will probably say is, you know something? I need to get back to you on that one because now I have to do more of a deeper dive on what I think is your trajectory. And, obviously that's a very important question to ask. So I would encourage everybody out there to ask your doctor, how do you see me in 5 years?
Well, and you also challenge people who are reading the book for men to have a mind shift, a mindset shift. I'm a huge believer in mindsets as well. So, what do you see most, and what should that shift be? I would assume what you see most is I'm good, I'm fine, I can handle anything, don't worry about it. What's the mind shift that we need?
I think the big, I, I think the big recognition is that we're talking about identity, but we're talking about identity expansion.
Mhm.
And what I mean is this, here's your mind shift. It's very fixed, right? It's been fixed in your 20s and 30s. I'm talking about a typical man who's successful, who became successful by accumulation, by goal setting, by KPIs, by, working and working hard. Um, but along the way, there were other mind shifts. There are other mindsets that say, all right, I'm getting older. This is, you can't teach a old dog new tricks, right? There's really nothing I can do about this because this is aging, but you don't want to talk about it. But the thing is, here's the deal. There is something you can do about it. Um, but it just has to be communicated through the right person. So that's kind of the mind shift. So the mind shift goes from a fixed mindset. We're going to talk about, uh, Ellie Langer's work, famous, right? To a growth mindset. You got to get out of that fixed. And also, there's an upgrade that's involved here. You got a certain operating system that you develop in your 20s and 30s. That should not be your only operating system. You have to expand that. You have to evolve that. And I think men would greatly benefit in their 40s and 60s, understanding that there's more out there. There's more dimensions out there to you that you haven't really considered yet. So
Yeah.
that's part of the message.
And I think too, just the willingness to do things in a different way. I mean, let's be honest, from a physical perspective, and I'm sure emotional too, you can do things in your 20s and 30s that you probably struggle with, or it's challenging in your 40s and 50s and beyond. So it doesn't mean you quit, doesn't mean you give up, but you just do things in a better way. Like uh, more efficient, more smart, smarter, not harder, type of approach that you just have to be willing to perhaps do something that you would have thought was silly in your 20s and 30s.
Absolutely. And you have to come to the realization too that I think there's this philosophy that goes around that everything declines, once you hit a certain age.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a story from medical school. When I was in medical school in the 80s, that's what we were taught. There was the age of 30 is when everything started to
Yeah.
decline. And everything, your brain, your body, um, senescent cells, everything would occur. So, there's really, you do the best you can, but you're trying to just manage decline. What we have found now is that, particularly in your brain, you have a remarkable capacity,
Yeah.
neuroplasticity, and you actually get smarter as you get older. Your crystallized intelligence, pattern recognition, because of your lived experience and your wisdom, you get smarter when you get older. That's why us older guys are better at crossword puzzles. We're better at certain games. We're better at trivia games, because we're getting, we start recognizing patterns better. And that's an edge. So I think a lot of times we should, kind of celebrate the advantages of, and of course, the privilege of
Yeah.
growing older.
I think
There
that's a
are there are positives.
Well, I think that's a perfect example of how, when we look at strictly science and strictly biology, you can make the argument, like you said, things start to deteriorate after, at 30. But yet, there's that other component that maybe isn't biology, which is, like you said, there's wisdom, there's efficiencies, there's learning, smarter ways to do things. There's all those kind of things that, in a leadership position, it's common to think and say, which I believe in, is that experience is everything. And so the way you would approach something younger without that experience could be very different. That I have all this experience and hopefully the wisdom to go with that, that I'm going to do things in a different way. That's not biology. That's just common sense and experience that you've used in a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just trial and error in motion, right? I mean, I think as you get wiser, you learn how to, you should learn how to cut your losses better. As a leadership in leadership, you should understand hiring slow and firing fast. I mean, there's a lot of things that you don't tolerate as an experienced leader that you would have tolerated 20 years ago because you have boundaries. You also have your own experience, and you don't want to waste your time on something that's not working. So that comes to you as you um, get older and wiser. And also, by the way, when we're talking about measuring happiness, you know, there's a certain there's a certain amount of lived experience that you have to have and perspective to understand what it takes to be happier. And guess what? That peaks in your late 50s into your 60s. So I just wanted to give guys out there, there's a lot of hope. The science is there, but the guidance is also there, and the compassion, the kindness, like you said. We can all get better with age in a lot of different dimensions.
I think a lot of it too is being open to seeing things in a different way. There's a very touching story in your book where you talk about, and it was from your wife, Deborah, who basically talked to you about presence. That
Mm.
the deepest form of leader, and we take that to leadership too. The deepest form of leadership is being present. So the deepest form of love is being present. So, tell us a little bit about when that smacked you in the face, and it's like, oh my gosh, you're so right, but it took you a while to figure it out, right?
Yeah, I mean, it happens so insidiously and slowly, right? You work, you come home, you're tired, and then you don't have that conversation because you just don't want to. And then once you don't have it, it just becomes a habit, right?
Yeah.
Um, Deborah told me love is a verb. And this was after a string of long shifts and maybe years of just getting tired at work, traveling, because I'm a traveling ER doctor as well. And by the time I got home, it was just like, how much cognitive bandwidth do I have for my wife? It wasn't much. And so I came to a realization that, I'm an ER doctor. I should understand about prioritizing because that's what I do for 12 hours a day, constantly with potentially life and death situations. What's going to make me stronger in my life is prioritizing those conversations at the dinner table. Um, and we've done a lot of studies about longevity, and we understand that being connected, being loved, being authentic, um, is the best longevity lever that we have. And Deborah had the strength to call me out and it was a slap in the face. And it's still a work in progress, but once again, it's one of those things where I feel like I'm getting better. Setting goals, getting better, and it becomes more comfortable. And then I start having a richer relationship with Deborah, and it's just there's nothing more empowering, and there's nothing that just makes you feel better day to day when you can just look at somebody and just say, "Wow, this person's had my back for 30 plus years, and I'm going to start stepping up and having uh, making sure that she has my back as that I have her back as well." So that's been something too that's been gratifying about making the change from being a traveling ER doctor to kind of being more of a physician leadership and seeing patients working from home. That's made our life richer, and I've understood that over my career because it's been 20 plus years of being a traveling doctor. As far as guys who travel a lot for work, they can understand that a lot when you're not there. We talk about presence. You have to be there to be present. There's no presence over FaceTime call, very little. And then when you're there, you have to be there um, with your heart and soul.
In the book, there are so many great quotes. Now, some of them come from your wife, some of them come from famous people at the beginning of each chapter and things like that. But a lot of them, I think, are your quotes, and I'm impressed with them. So you just must be a quote guy, right? You might just must think of ways to say things that are very meaningful. So I'm going to read this part because I think this is one that I pulled out, and I got many more to share. But this one is. It's you say story alone can move you, science alone can teach you, wisdom alone can steady you, but none of them alone can transform you. Transformation only happens when they all converge. Very, very powerful. That's very impactful. I think it really does say that each one of those things we could say we're really good at, but unless we do all of them and they come together in some way, we're missing a piece.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's, we, a lot of times I think we're good at the science and maybe the wisdom. Maybe we're not as good as about the story, because we used to live in tribes and the story, everybody knew everybody else's story. All the communities were tight. And now it's a situation where you don't even know who your neighbor is. So I think of it as a three-legged stool. You can have a component, but the stool is going to be pretty wobbly unless you have all three. So yeah, I mean, and to to kind of answer your question too, I'm a geek. I go around with the 3x5 card, and well, now at least when I'm doing my walks, I will, if I think of something, um, I'll dictate it into my phone and my notes. But literally, maybe 3 or 4 times a day, I'm writing down my thoughts and kind of trying to make them into bite-size quotes, and some of them gut punches, but mostly to me, it's just like, what do I need to hear? And it's my style and my voice. So literally, I have a collection of maybe 2,000 3x5 index cards that have those quotes, and so I was able to work them into the book.
Um, they're really great, those quotes. And then also back to your storytelling. We've talked about a lot about this on this podcast about what a powerful leadership tool storytelling is. And I can read a book and you can tell me about biomarkers and things that happen in the blood and this and that and it can make sense to me, but what really, and maybe this is a personality trait, but what really moves me is when you tell the story of the guy coming into the ER and what happens and his family watching through the windows and the people that are crying and the people that try to help, and I mean that to me really hammers the point home as this is what I'm trying to tell you. It's just not a scientific fact. It's a real life emotional story.
I think what that comes from is that I read a lot of books, and I read a lot of my colleagues' books. I read a lot of scientific books as well. And I just feel like there's just not that connection. If you're going to be dry and talking about the science, obviously that's that's an important component. I mean, the science is very fast moving, it's very nuanced. That sort of discussion is very necessary. But I think if you're trying to connect with somebody on a deeper, more intimate level, you have to talk about the story. You have to talk about other people who are there with the person, how other people are in your lives. And yeah, that's the only way that's going to stick. I mean, it's my Angelou, right? I mean, you're not going to remember what he said. You're going to remember how you felt, though.
Yeah.
So that's very important.
Well, and you also state you said it earlier, and I just want to emphasize it because you brought it up again, the word connection. And you state in the book, and you said it earlier, that the simple greatest predictor of longevity, is connection. It's we need to connect with other people and we can't do it alone. And so the person who retreats and just sits in their house all day and doesn't get up and interact with others or move or do the things that we know are helpful is just going to deteriorate a lot faster.
Well, that's kind of the most dangerous thing, right? Being in your own head 24/7. That's a problem. I mean,
Yeah,
I mean, in the criminal justice system, what is the harshest criminals, they go into solitary confinement for a reason. And so what I would want our listeners to understand is that don't do that to yourself. Don't give yourself solitary confinement for all your waking hours because that's not the way you're supposed to that's not the way you're supposed to thrive. You're supposed to thrive by getting out of your own head, by listening, by helping, by allowing a community to take place. So, if you asked a question every day, maybe even every hour, is what I'm doing now making me stronger or is it making me weaker? And if sulking, doom scrolling, sitting, if that's part of your hour, then I would say let's do something to make you stronger because whatever you're doing right now, that's making you weaker. Understanding the difference between the two and then being able to take that action, I think those are those small daily habitual steps that ultimately pay big dividends and make you really feel like you're thriving and living.
and then getting back to the kind of tough guy, I can handle this. I don't need to worry about this and whatever. You also state that what you refuse to name starts to rot within.
Oh yeah. Yep. Absolutely right. I mean, Dr. Phil said it, you got to name it to claim it.
Yeah.
Um, if you bury it with you, it's not going anywhere. It's getting stronger. It's sitting there, it's festering. And the profound thing is that it's getting so much stronger because it's underneath your consciousness. So it's sitting there, it's manifesting as all sorts of other things, and you don't connect the dots.
Yeah. You also say in the book, you bring up a specific event where you said that one day you discovered Adam Grant's book, Think Again. And you said that, doubt isn't failure, it's humility. And it's a guardrail against arrogance. So again, the male the way men look at things, it's it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to have doubt. It's okay to not know the answer. And in leadership, we talk about it all the time that the worst leader is the one who thinks he knows the answer, to everything. A good leader is the one who seeks out, more information from more people to try and come to the answer. And so, I thought that was interesting too. Adam Grant's a great writer, and we know who he is, but it's
Yeah, it really is. So we're talking about two big concepts that we talk about in leadership as well. So the first one is imposter syndrome. That was a huge block for me. Um, and I actually had a very uh, poignant conversation with Deborah. And I talked about how it was so strong. And it was only after reading Adam Grant's Think Again where I was able to put a different spin on it and look at it as a positive rather than negative. Um, and she had a very poignant discussion where she said, "Why would you even have any lick of imposter syndrome? You worked your butt off to get where you are. there should be zero imposter syndrome to you. You struggled, you outworked everybody, you earned everything that you've gotten. But I said, but babe, you're still, for me, the bullies were still running space in my brain. It was just like time goes and there's time discounting, and you sit there, you forget about how hard you worked. You forget about all those sleepless nights and all those weekends and all those fun things that you put off to accomplish what you want to accomplish. And I think too, what factors into it these days is because of technology. As you get older, you're more accomplished. You feel like you're more replaceable. And I think that fear kind of factors into it. But yeah, imposter syndrome, I still see articles after articles discussing it, how it causes burnout, how it's okay because everybody has it. But, I really wanted to get into the discussion about Adam Grant's specific positive take on it, how it also just kind of says if you have a little doubt, then guess what? That means you're not a narcissist. That
Yeah.
means you just don't think you know everything. So that's very helpful. Another thing that you just brought up about leadership is the concept of ontological humility. Obviously very important, where you understand that your viewpoint is just a very narrow viewpoint of the whole world, and even in your own company or in your own circle. Um, and understanding that just makes you more open and willing to hear different perspectives and to talk about different things. I mean, I think that's what makes a leader great, is when he can say, all right, everyone's agreeing with me. This is not good.
Yeah,
We need to
exactly.
talk about devil's advocates, about threats. We're being a little too vanilla here. We need to, if we're going to move forward, we need to talk about things that could go wrong. And we need that kind of perspective, and that's going to really help us grow.
And coming to terms with that we all have imposter syndrome. Everybody does. I can't imagine anybody who doesn't. Another good quote you had too, if you don't deal with things like that, is you said, hurt people, which I think is really true, right?
Yeah, that's just. I mean, why wouldn't
Yeah.
hurt people? I mean, you're just externalizing and projecting your own pain onto somebody else. And that's when you start talking about humanity and having compassion. I mean, everybody is a hurt person, but you have to kind of reconcile that and reckon with that and just say, okay, yeah, I'm a hurt person. I'm wounded, but I'm not going to use that as fuel to hurt somebody else, because guess what? That just perpetuates the cycle. Now we're not in a point where we can start healing each other. Somebody has to stop saying, all right, yes, I've been hurt, but I'm not going to take that out on somebody else. Because now what are you doing? All the people that hurt you in the past, now you're just giving them more power. Through you, you're the vessel where you're creating more pain. You have to stand up and say, that's just not who I am. And I'm just not going to allow that.
When we look at medicine specifically, and those of us who are in the medical field know this to be true, and so hopefully there's hope in the future that this will change. But as you say in the book, medicine was built on averages. So guidelines from were drawn from group data. Guesswork, treats the crowd, but precision treats the person. So hopefully, as we get more sophisticated and with AI and maybe some other tools, that we can get to that personalized medicine where you're going to treat me based on my specific set of markers as opposed to a 10,000 person study.
Absolutely. I mean, isn't it ironic that, you are a unique person, yet medicine treats you as a statistic,
Yeah.
um, purely purely as a statistic. So when you encounter what I call threshold medicine, you have to meet a certain threshold or a number to be treated. And what I would like to say is that because you're treated as a statistic, your destiny is to become a statistic. You know, you're destined to be that 55-year-old gentleman with the heart attack because you're going to go to a doctor and he's going to say, well, everything's fine. But it's not fine for you because you wouldn't have gone to the doctor to begin with, right? If everything felt fine. So yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity to use technology to really create a precise precision treatment plan that applies to you specifically and not just your snapshot of labs for today, but what your labs were 5, 10 years ago, what your trajectory is, intersected with your genetics. I think it's just an exciting time where we can really start preventing disease. We can really start managing trajectories and where we can really start helping people.
And it's not all just, science and technology either. It's listening to the patient and hearing what they're saying and being present as we talked earlier. A name that jumped out in the book too that I've heard before is Dr. Stephen Gundry. And so,
Mhm.
here's a cardiovascular surgeon who's done all these amazing things, and he finally came to the point like, I'm treating everybody after it's too late. So why don't I treat somebody before they get to this? So he's actually gone more on the preventative side, even though giving up, a huge career and very well known throughout the world as being, the top of the pyramid. But yet he's saying we're doing something wrong. Why am I fixing people when they're already mostly broken?
Absolutely. And he has his own story too. One of my biggest role models, I think, probably like I mentioned in the book, one of the big reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing now, because, I followed his guidelines, just said, hey, this makes sense.
Yeah.
At the time, I was vegan and didn't realize I was just incorporating a lot of inflammatory chemicals into my body. And lo and behold, the proof is in the pudding. 2 months later, I had a massive physical and mental transformation. I just said, something that just gave me the epiphany. As a physician, I've been following these guidelines, and man, I've been part of the problem. I have not been part of the solution, and that really moved me to say, I need to start being part of the solution.
And if you think about it from a biology perspective too, you also say in the book that the body is built for bursts, not maintenance. And what saves you in a sprint slowly kills you in a marathon.
Yeah,
And then if you take that to the emotional side of things too, you also state that if your armor never comes off, it suffocates you.
yeah, absolutely. And
So
we're talking about the male mindset. We're also talking about chronic stress. These are the things that we adapt to because it's human nature. If
yeah.
if it's in our comfort zone, even if it's damaging, we would rather stay in that because it's familiar. And
And I
so
think,
we have to change that.
and things do, get better in some ways. I'll just give you an example. Like in my generation, growing up as a young man, if you said you were in therapy or going to go see a mental health specialist or something, you were like, oh my God, what's wrong with that guy? And now the newer generations that's common language. My therapist, the person I'm working with to work things out, whatever it, and so that's a positive. And you say in the book too that the body always confesses what the mind denies.
Yeah.
So the mind is so important in the overall function of our biological bodies. You just have to deal with that. You can't just do it through medication and technology. It has to be done through the mental side as well.
I think it's the missing component of health. We have a mental health crisis in America. There's no doubt that we do, particularly amongst men who are having the highest rates of suicide, the biggest amounts of mental health conditions. Um, and a big component of it is we just don't want to talk about it. As a man, we've crystallized this notion that if we talk about things that we feel like are going to appear to be weaknesses, then that becomes a large psychological threat to our own safety. So that's why we don't talk about it. We
Yeah,
don't want to feel unsafe.
sure. And to that point, you give another great story where you were giving a keynote speech. And as a scientist and a physician, you had all your slides and all the data and all this stuff. And then you just kind of walked out on stage and Tank just didn't even pull them up. And you just told stories and just were very vulnerable to the crowd. And tell us the reaction the crowd had from that presentation.
Well, it was one of those things where I was honored to be part of a ER convention, a national ER convention, and talking about leadership. So I prepared. I didn't want to stand out. I prepared something that was very dry, very academic, and I felt like it stayed in my lane. But something bothered me about that when I was prepping the slides. And it just finally came to a head right before I got on stage. I saw the bright lights and I just said, something, this is BS. That you don't need to, people don't need this. What do people need? I mean, what do you need to share? And I write in the book, it was my 10-year-old kid that I had a conversation with. And he said, you need to, you're not going to grow unless you share your story. And what a perfect time and venue. How lucky you are to be able to share your story amongst your peers that already respect you. This is a very curated audience, and I think they're going to receive this um, tremendously well. And the reception was not just, it wasn't polite applause. It was guttural. It was heartwarming. And I can't tell you, Steve, how many other physicians and leaders came up to me and just said, something, I'm glad you shared your story because it's very similar to my story as well. And being able to bring the pain and being able to bring that out in the open and understand that there are ways to deal with that was just very empowering. It was one of the most moving moments of my life.
Yeah, it was great to read, and thanks for sharing that because I do think it brings to the point, like you were saying, we just have to look at things and be open to things. Like another thing that you say too is that men often confuse wealth and worth are very different currencies. So we're so focused on, we gotta do this, we gotta provide for our families, we gotta make this much money, and we've got to do this, we've got to do that. But you can be very wealthy and not have a lot of worth in relationships and other things. So they're very different currencies. I like how you said that.
Well, thanks. It is a big, and how are we incentivized? We're incentivized to the wealth, to the number. And also, you're always hearing commercials about how you don't have enough money to retire because, you're going to have a disease or you're going to live longer, you're going to outlive your retirement. So there's that fear that that industry plays on and does it extremely well.
Yes.
So, you're always putting out a number that you need, and then the AI will analyze the number and make it higher. So, you're always going to say, "Oh, I don't have enough for retirement because, this number is a lot higher than." And when you really look at it, the number doesn't matter. Um, it uh, it is good to provide for your family. It is good to plan for your future. I'm not discounting any of that, but you have to understand where a lot of that's coming from. It's coming from a place of fear. You want to spend your time um, having interactions with your grandchildren and your kids and the people who love you and the people who are in your inner circle. That's the that's the sort of value and the worth that you can't put a price tag on that. So, you get to the end of the life like we all will. None of us are going to say, I wish I worked harder. I
Yeah.
wish I earned more money. You're going to just the regrets that you're going to have about are going to be very, very predictable. I wish I would have had that conversation with that person before that person passed away, or I wish I would have been able to kind of bury that situation that I carried for a long time. That's how you should kind of look at things when you're talking about wealth versus worth. Make yourself as worthy as possible. Don't worry about the number.
And be comfortable with, as you said in the book, every choice either compounds energy or compounds exhaustion, and the math never lies. So we do have choices to do that. We have choices to work that hard, push that hard, whatever, or not, or do things in a different, more efficient, more healthy way.
Yeah, and that's just being aware and trying to plan that into your daily routine or into your day. You're going to be able to have lots of excuses. Oh, I don't want to do that, or it's too hot to walk outside, or I kind of feel sore. And but it's always a matter of, is this going to strengthen me or is this going to weaken me? Is this going to give me more energy? Because it's physics, right? I mean, body in motion stays in motion, body at rest stays at rest. So you have to act your way into feeling. You have to generate energy, and that creates your feeling. I feel more awake and energetic because I moved. I did my morning walk, um, rather than, oh man, I feel so tired. I just don't feel like doing anything right now. But those are two different things, right? And if you make a choice to energize, it's always going to be better for you.
One of my favorite quotes in the book was when you told the story that you're the day before you go to medical school
Mm.
and you're sitting there with your mom and you're basically scared shitless. And so you just really opened up to her and told her what you were feeling, what you're going through. And tell us the quote that she said. I just love it.
So I'll paint the story or the picture. I've stayed in College Station, went to school in my hometown because my dad was a professor there, and I was about to go to Houston for medical school. I've been to Houston many times. It's a big city, and so all those fears came up. All from all the bullying. I got bullied in a small town. I mean, the big town's going to eat me alive. And I am scared. I mean, I'm not only scared on different levels, but imposter syndrome. Maybe this is the level where I'm not going to be able to cut it. It's a whole new world, and trying to adjust to this. And my mom's very kind, gentle, nurturing, and so I thought she was going to give me the same old comfort. You're going to be fine. Keep doing what you're doing. And what she said shocked me. I was just like, she said, she said, honey, you're different. So you go make a difference. And then she also said, you go show everyone that you're here to, you're here to really help and change the world. That's the way you're cut. You're not made to blend in with the crowd. And that's your advantage. So you go make a difference.
Well,
I
I
was
love it.
just, yeah, I was shocked that my gentle mom would give me that kind of major pep talk, and I was just like, all right, well, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's exactly what you needed. Is she
Yeah,
still with us? She's
she is. She's
yeah.
she's she's going to be 92 in February and still
Oh, man.
gardening every day and has like a beautiful garden. Yeah, she does 100 squats a day.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
she's crazy.
And I think we've hinted at it and we've said it in different ways, but I just want to emphasize the point too as we wind down here that again, the single greatest predictor of both health span and happiness is this quality of close relationships. And to be honest, I've said this before because I believe it. I think women are much better at that than men are. And I see a lot of men, my vintage going and having very few close friends or don't have those deep relationships. And that's a mistake because when we get to, especially in our elderly years, we need that. We need that to keep going and to nurture our souls.
Yeah, I think, and I would absolutely agree that women are better than men. Um, we are the weaker sex. Just that goes without saying.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say it. It just, when you can get to where you're such a caretaker and that's part of your DNA and part of your life, and opening up to other people is such an important part of your life. And being able to share and being able to get to know people and being able to have people know you, that's such a gift. And women are better at it. Women live 7 years longer than men on average. And that is not by accident. That is not just a random statistic. That is directly because of the ability to connect and understand that being able to share something with someone else and have that feeling in your body and your mind and being able to regenerate your soul that way is so important. So men, it's tough because my dad's about to turn 92. All his buddies and friends from Korea, and also all the professors that he and his friends that he had in College Station, they've all passed away. So he's like he's the only one, but he's adjusting to it really well. It just shows that me and my brothers also need to pick it up a little bit, but it just says, loneliness and isolation. I think
Yeah.
those are the biggest risk factors in men's health and lifespan and health span.
And you've also just made a case for, I think it's important to have close relationships and friends of different generations.
I
Hanging out with
think,
younger people and hearing new ideas and being open to the way they look at things different than maybe you look at things. That's very important too.
well, I think that's why my dad, he was a professor of political science. He worked until he was 75. And he said, what keeps me young is being around young people,
Yeah.
because, it's kind of like to the point. It was so cute. He would come down, he would ask me, what does this word mean? A colloquialism that someone 20 years old would say. And I was like, Dad, I don't even know what that means. And these days, it's a whole different language, with texting. It's just like, I have no idea what that emoji means, but, that's okay. There's some things I'd rather not spend time learning, because I'm busy trying to learn some other things.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Rowe, we've covered a lot of ground today. In anticipation of our discussion today, what haven't I asked you that you want to be sure and get into the program?
I think we've covered everything. I just wanted to emphasize the concept of regret, and regret doesn't have to be something that you look at. It doesn't have to be a backwards facing emotion. It can be a daily compass.
Yeah.
You can just go into every day with intention and saying, all right, well, you know, will I regret what I'm doing or not doing, 5 years from now, 5 months from now? And I think if you go in with that mindset and you make it a daily compass, I think you reap huge benefits.
What we didn't talk about, so just maybe tell us what this is and tell us a little bit about the mission. You're also the founder of Back in the Game Men. So what is that organization and what is the mission of that?
So Back in the Game Men is my telemedicine practice where I work with men directly, ages 40 to 70. And I have a lot of different layers of how I feel like I can help. I mean, essentially, I want the patient, the man that I'm working with to, be on a hero journey. And I'm their trusted guide because I don't want to see heart attacks in the ER anymore. I want to see men who are thriving. And I want the midlife to be part of the best times of your life. And I want to say part of the reason that the book is named Prime is that I want men to understand that they haven't reached their prime yet. Your prime is not over. Your prime may be just beginning. And there might be different primes in your life, but I want you to understand that every day that you wake up is a opportunity to be the best you can be and be better. So that's what I'm talking about winning the second half. It's the game's not over until it's over.
So if people wanted to reach out and investigate that telehealth service, how would they find you?
They can go to the website www.backinthegamemen.com. And then also another one of my flagship websites for my ecosystem is just my name, KennethRoweMD.com. That where you can find a lot of resources, a lot of articles. But if you want to work with me directly, um, there are a lot of different ways that you can do that. I'm more than more than pleased and grateful to be able to help any men struggling, or help them along to a different pathway to help.
At this point in the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question, and that question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
You can get a pearl is that you're not getting older, you're getting better.
Mm,
You
that's
really
great.
are. When it comes to leadership, your lived experience, your your wisdom, and everything that you've gathered throughout your career and for the future has the ability to just get better.
And I feel like I want to ask this question too as we end here today. So you focused on just men. Why? And would you work with a woman if she wanted to work with you?
I actually work with women, obviously my wife, my sister-in-law, my family members. The reason I chose to start with men is because, I wanted to create a niche where my own story, my own experience would create some rapport right off the bat. So, I do feel like women's health has been a huge blind spot in medicine. Um, the hormone replacement therapy just had the black box released last year. So there was 20 years of women suffering through their postmenopausal syndromes, through postmenopause, and also getting more osteoporosis because hormones were bad. Hormones cause cancer. And then now we finally put some sense into it and said, that really was not what the data showed. So the opportunity to help women, and also think of it this way, Steve. I mean, and the women listening can resonate. It was gaslighting. You talk about how you're having all these symptoms that could have been helped, and everyone is just like, oh, it's just all part of it. It'll go away. It's okay. Um, that to me is just a huge tragedy, and I think working like crazy to kind of make sure that sort of medicine doesn't happen again, is a big commitment of mine. So yes, I am very interested in working with women. The reason that I chose to work with men is I wanted a kind of a specific niche to work with first, but I certainly want to expand to treat women as well. So there's going to be another component to it. It's going to be back in the game women or something like that.
Great.
Uh, and yeah, yeah.
Well, Ken, thanks for your time today. It sounds like you're doing great things and doing things that move you and help people. So that's what it's all about. So I appreciate you sharing all your wisdom with us today, and hope the book does well for you and your practice grows. And thanks for being on the show.
Well, you're very welcome, Steve, and thanks for reading my book so intently. Obviously, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you got some use out of it. But it's refreshing to come on a podcast and have someone that has really done their due diligence. So I appreciate that,
Well, thank you. Well, take care. Have a good rest of your day, and maybe we'll meet down the road one of these days.
and that would be amazing. Thank you,
All right.
Steve.
Take care. Bye bye now.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.